Some people believe the poorest workers beg because they are lazy, but sometimes they beg because someone has stolen the only thing they ever earned. Emily Brooks had never imagined she would kneel in front of another human being. Yet, that was exactly where life had brought her on a cold Monday morning inside the Romano headquarters in downtown Chicago. The polished marble floors reflected the towering crystal chandeliers above, while expensive suits moved confidently through the lobby, without noticing the woman in the simple navy housekeeping uniform standing quietly near the reception desk. Her hands trembled as she clutched a worn envelope filled with unpaid utility notices, hospital invoices, and a handwritten reminder from St. Andrew Medical Center stating that her mother's treatment could not continue without another payment by the end of the week. Emily had worked for the Romano estate for nearly 8 months. She arrived before sunrise, left after sunset, never complained, never missed a shift, and treated every room as though it belonged to someone she respected. Yet for the second consecutive month, her paycheck had never reached her bank account. She had reported the problem through every official channel. Each time she received the same answer. According to payroll records, she had already been paid in full. This morning was different. She had nowhere else to turn. The receptionist finally received permission to escort her upstairs. Emily stepped into an executive office larger than the apartment she shared with her mother. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, while shelves filled with rare books surrounded a massive walnut desk where Vincent Moretti, the white mafia boss whose business empire employed hundreds of people, calmly reviewed financial reports without looking up. His tailored black suit appeared as flawless as the room around him. Emily swallowed her pride before speaking in a respectful voice. "Sir, I am sorry for disturbing your morning. I only need the wages I have already earned." Vincent slowly lifted his eyes from the documents. His expression remained composed, almost unreadable. "Payroll shows every payment has already been completed." Emily carefully placed the hospital notice on his desk. "My mother needs treatment by Friday. I am not asking for charity. I am asking for the paycheck I worked for." Vincent glanced briefly at the paper before pressing a button on his desk. Within moments, Daniel Cooper, the company's chief accountant, entered carrying a digital payroll report. Daniel adjusted his glasses and confidently pointed toward the screen. "Emily Brooks. Direct deposit completed exactly on schedule. Electronic confirmation received. There are no outstanding wages." Vincent folded his hands together. "You have your answer." Emily stared at the report as confusion slowly replaced hope. "Sir, I have never received that money." Daniel shook his head with professional certainty. "The records do not lie." For several silent seconds, Emily struggled to hold back tears. Finally, she lowered herself onto one knee, not to seek pity, but because desperation had become heavier than pride. "Please," she whispered, "if there has been a mistake, help me find it before my mother loses her treatment." Vincent looked at the woman before him without changing his expression. Years of leading powerful organizations had taught him that emotions often hid deception, while numbers rarely did. He stood and walked toward the towering windows overlooking the city. "The company cannot pay the same wages twice," he said calmly. "If the records show payment was made, then the matter is closed." Emily slowly stood, gathered the unpaid bills, and thanked him with quiet dignity despite the disappointment filling her heart. She turned toward the door without another word, leaving behind only the faint sound of careful footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Vincent watched her reflection disappear through the glass office door, yet something about the sadness in her eyes refused to disappear with her, planting the smallest seed of doubt inside a man who had always trusted numbers more than people. Emily stepped out of the Romano headquarters with the same quiet composure she had carried into the building, but every step across the cold Chicago sidewalk felt heavier than the last. The towering glass skyscrapers reflected the afternoon sunlight, while thousands of people hurried toward meetings, restaurants, and train stations, each absorbed in lives that seemed untouched by the quiet desperation she carried inside the worn envelope pressed against her chest. She paused for a moment before looking at the hospital reminder once more. Friday. That single word seemed to weigh more than every cleaning cart she had ever pushed through the endless hallways of the Romano estate. Folding the paper carefully so it would not crease any further, she slipped it back into the envelope and began the long bus ride home. The apartment building where Emily lived stood in an aging neighborhood on the south side, its faded brick walls showing decades of harsh Chicago winters. It was not beautiful, but it was home. As soon as she unlocked the front door, the familiar scent of homemade vegetable soup greeted her. Her mother, Linda Brooks, looked up from a worn recliner and smiled despite the exhaustion visible across her face. "You are home early," she said softly. Emily forced a smile of her own before placing groceries onto the small kitchen counter. There was only enough food for a few more days, but she carefully arranged everything as though abundance still filled the cupboards. "I stopped by the office before work," she answered gently. Linda immediately understood without another explanation. Did they fix the mistake? Emily remained silent for a few seconds before slowly shaking her head. Her mother's smile faded, but only for a moment. "Then we will find another way." Emily knelt beside her mother's chair and rested a comforting hand over hers. "I promised Dad that I would always take care of you. I am not giving up." Later that evening, after preparing dinner and organizing her mother's medication, Emily quietly left the apartment once again. Instead of resting after another exhausting day, she walked 6 blocks to a neighborhood diner where she spent several evening hours washing dishes to earn extra money. Steam filled the small kitchen while plates stacked endlessly beside industrial sinks, yet she never complained. Every dollar mattered. Every hour mattered. Long after most customers had gone home, Emily finally stepped outside into the cool night air, carrying a small paper bag containing leftovers the manager insisted she take home. Across town, Vincent Moretti remained alone inside his office overlooking the glittering city skyline. The payroll report still rested on his desk exactly where Daniel Cooper had left it. Every number appeared perfect. Every payment had been electronically confirmed. Yet the image that refused to leave Vincent's mind was not the spreadsheet. It was the moment Emily had quietly thanked him after he refused her request. Most people argued. Some became angry. Others threatened lawsuits. Emily had done none of those things. She had simply accepted disappointment with a dignity that unsettled him far more than accusations ever could. Vincent stood beside the window, watching evening lights spread across Chicago like countless stars reflected upon the earth. Numbers had built everything he owned. Numbers had never betrayed him. Still, for the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether a perfectly balanced ledger could somehow conceal a deeply human truth that no spreadsheet was ever designed to reveal. The following morning arrived with the same quiet routine that had shaped Emily Brooks's life for years. Before sunrise painted the Chicago skyline with pale shades of gold, she was already inside the Romano estate carrying a polished wooden cleaning caddy through the long marble hallway. Every picture frame hung perfectly straight. Every crystal chandelier reflected the growing daylight. Every room looked flawless before the owners or guests had even begun their day. Emily moved from one task to the next with practiced care, never rushing, never cutting corners, believing that honest work deserved honest effort regardless of who noticed it. Around mid-morning, Sarah Mitchell, the estate manager, approached while reviewing the daily schedule on a digital tablet. She stopped beside Emily and watched her gently restore a centuries-old wooden table using slow, careful movements that protected every detail of the antique finish. "You always treat these pieces as though they belong to your own family," Sarah said with a warm smile. Emily looked up politely. "Someone trusted me to care for them. That matters." Sarah nodded with quiet admiration before continuing toward another section of the house. Her conversation lingered in Emily's mind, reminding her that respect was never measured by salary, but by character. Several miles away, Vincent Moretti entered another executive meeting, yet his attention wandered more than once toward the payroll report resting inside a leather folder beside him. Investors discussed expansion plans. Attorneys reviewed contracts. Advisors analyzed quarterly projections. Normally, Vincent noticed every number without effort. But today his concentration repeatedly drifted back to the woman who had calmly thanked him after being refused the wages she insisted she had earned. When the meeting finally ended, he dismissed everyone except Daniel Cooper. "One question," Vincent said evenly. "Have there ever been payroll errors in this company?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Every large business experiences occasional administrative mistakes, but nothing significant. Our electronic systems are independently verified." Vincent leaned back in his chair. And Emily Brooks. Daniel immediately opened the payroll records again. Every payment shows completed. Direct deposit confirmations. Electronic authorization. Digital receipt. Everything is exactly where it should be. Vincent quietly closed the folder. Very well. Yet even after Daniel left, something continued to trouble him. Late that afternoon, Vincent decided to visit the Romano estate unexpectedly rather than returning directly home. As he walked through the expansive gardens, he noticed Emily carrying several heavy bags of autumn leaves toward the maintenance area. Another employee accidentally dropped an entire box of freshly folded linens onto the stone pathway. Without hesitation, Emily placed her own work aside and hurried over to help gather every neatly folded sheet before the wind scattered them across the courtyard. She smiled reassuringly at the embarrassed young employee and quietly said, "Everyone needs help sometimes." She never looked around to see whether anyone had witnessed the moment. She simply returned to her own work without expecting gratitude or recognition. Standing beneath the shade of a large oak tree, Vincent watched everything unfold from a distance. There was no audience, no supervisor, no reward waiting for her. Only genuine kindness expressed as naturally as breathing. For the first time since their meeting inside his office, Vincent felt an unfamiliar discomfort settle across his thoughts. If Emily had truly intended to deceive him, why did every ordinary moment reveal a woman whose actions matched her words with effortless consistency? As evening shadows stretched across the estate, Vincent slowly turned away from the garden with one quiet decision forming in his mind. Before this week ended, he would personally discover whether the numbers he had trusted for years were protecting the truth or hiding it. The next morning, Vincent Moretti arrived at headquarters earlier than anyone expected, carrying only a cup of black coffee and the quiet determination that had built his reputation over decades. Outside his office, the city was just beginning to wake, but inside the executive floor the lights were already glowing across rows of silent workstations. Instead of reviewing investment reports or meeting with business partners, Vincent walked directly into the accounting department where Daniel Cooper was organizing payroll files for the upcoming pay period. Daniel looked up with surprise. "Good morning, sir. Is something urgent?" Vincent placed Emily Brooks's employee file on the desk. "I want to review every payroll transaction connected to her employment. Not the summary. Everything." Daniel hesitated for only a second before opening the company's secure payroll system. Month after month appeared on the screen. Each paycheck showed the same status. Authorized. Processed. Completed. Electronic confirmation received. The records appeared flawless, exactly as they had before. Daniel folded his arms confidently. "As I explained, there is no discrepancy." Vincent remained silent while studying the details more carefully than ever before. His eyes moved slowly across. Dates, transaction numbers, account confirmations, and digital signatures. Everything looked correct, yet he found himself remembering Emily's steady voice inside his office. She had not demanded extra money. She had not exaggerated her situation. She had asked only for the wages she had earned. "Print every supporting document," Vincent finally said. "Every authorization form. Every payment receipt. Every signature." Within minutes, the printer filled the room with the steady rhythm of paper sliding into the output tray. Thick stacks of payroll records covered the conference table beside them. As Daniel organized the files, Sarah Mitchell entered carrying maintenance schedules from the Romano estate. She immediately noticed the unusual collection of payroll documents. "What is going on?" she asked. Vincent answered without looking up. "I am verifying one employee's payment history." Sarah glanced at the name on the folder. "Emily." Vincent nodded. Sarah frowned thoughtfully before reaching for one of the authorization forms. "May I?" Vincent quietly handed her the document. Sarah studied the signature for several moments, then requested another file from a different month. She placed both pages side by side. At first glance, the signatures appeared identical, but after several seconds her expression changed. "Something feels strange." Daniel looked puzzled. "They match perfectly." Sarah slowly shook her head. "Not perfectly. Look at the way she writes the capital B in Brooks. On this document, the second curve is tighter. On this one, it is wider. The handwriting is extremely similar, but it does not have the same natural rhythm." Daniel leaned closer, suddenly less certain than before. Vincent watched both signatures in complete silence. The difference was subtle enough that almost anyone would overlook it. Yet once Sarah pointed it out, it became impossible to ignore. Vincent requested several more authorization forms from different months. Again, the same pattern appeared. Similar signatures, nearly identical, but never completely consistent. No obvious mistake existed inside the electronic records, yet the physical documents raised questions that the computer could not answer. The room grew unusually quiet as certainty slowly gave way to suspicion. Vincent closed the final folder and looked toward Daniel with calm authority. This review is no longer routine. I want security footage from every payroll distribution day, archived access logs, and every document connected to employee wage processing over the past year. Until we understand exactly what happened, assume nothing. As Daniel hurried to gather the requested records, Sarah looked once more at Emily's file, realizing that what had begun as a simple payroll question was becoming something much larger, and somewhere inside the carefully organized system that everyone had trusted, a hidden truth was waiting to be uncovered. By Thursday afternoon, the investigation had quietly expanded far beyond a routine payroll review. Every security recording, access log, electronic authorization, and archived document from the previous year had been collected inside a secure conference room where Vincent Moretti, Daniel Cooper, and Sarah Mitchell worked side by side without interruption. Hours passed as they compared timestamps, bank confirmations, employee records, and surveillance footage from payroll processing days. At first, every system appeared to support the official records, but the deeper they searched, the more small inconsistencies began to surface. Several electronic approvals had been entered within seconds of one another, even though they supposedly came from different departments located on separate floors. One access badge had been used to enter the payroll office after normal business hours on multiple occasions, always shortly before Emily Brooks's wages were marked as completed. Daniel replayed another security recording, slowing the video frame by frame until a familiar face appeared entering the payroll office carrying a folder that should never have left the accounting department. The employee had administrative access, a trusted position, and years of experience, making every action appear ordinary at the time. Sarah immediately noticed that the same person appeared in several different recordings connected to payroll processing dates. Vincent said nothing as another document was placed before him. This time it was not the signature that drew his attention. It was the bank account information attached to several payroll authorizations. Most employees received direct deposits into accounts ending with their own identifying numbers. Emily's file, however, showed subtle edits hidden within older system backups. The current record displayed one account, while an archived version briefly revealed another before it had been overwritten. Daniel compared the data with banking confirmations and slowly removed his glasses. "This cannot be accidental," he said quietly. Someone redirected her wages before the final records were locked. The room fell silent. Months of missing paychecks had not disappeared because of a computer error. They had been diverted through deliberate manipulation carried out by someone who understood the payroll system well enough to avoid immediate detection. Vincent closed the file and stared through the conference room window without speaking. He remembered Emily standing in his office asking for nothing more than what she had honestly earned. He remembered refusing her because he believed the numbers without questioning the people behind them. That memory settled heavily across his conscience. Sarah carefully gathered every verified document into a single folder. "She was telling the truth from the beginning," she said softly. Daniel nodded with visible regret. Every paycheck she believed was missing really was taken before it ever reached her. Vincent slowly exhaled and looked back at the evidence spread across the table. The investigation had answered the question that had followed him for days, but the truth brought no satisfaction. It only revealed how easily trust in a perfect system had allowed an honest employee to suffer in silence. Closing the final folder, Vincent gave his next instruction with calm certainty. "Calculate every dollar Emily should have received, including every benefit connected to those wages. Then prepare a complete report for me before sunset. Tomorrow, I will speak with her myself, and this time I will not rely on a spreadsheet to understand the truth." Friday morning arrived beneath a gray Chicago sky, and while most of the city rushed toward another ordinary workday, Vincent Moretti drove somewhere he had never expected to visit. The address printed on the investigation report led him to St. Andrew Medical Center, where Emily Brooks had spent nearly every evening after finishing long hours at the Romano estate and her second job at the neighborhood diner. He entered the hospital without an entourage or assistance, choosing to walk the quiet hallways alone. Nurses greeted patients with gentle smiles while families sat beside loved ones in waiting areas, each carrying burdens invisible to strangers passing by. Guided only by the room number listed in the report, Vincent slowed his pace as he approached a partially open door. He stopped before entering when he heard Emily's familiar voice speaking softly from inside. "Do not worry about me, Mom. Everything will be all right. We have made it through difficult days before, and we will make it through this one too." Vincent remained still, unnoticed beyond the doorway. Linda Brooks looked tired, but her eyes were filled with gratitude as she reached for her daughter's hand. "You should not have to work so hard," she whispered. Emily smiled with quiet warmth. "Work has never frightened me. The only thing that frightens me is giving up on the people I love." She carefully adjusted her mother's blanket before opening a small paper bag containing fruit, soup, and medication purchased with money earned from washing dishes late into the night. There were no expensive gifts, no dramatic gestures, only simple acts of devotion repeated day after day without expectation of recognition. Vincent noticed the worn shoes Emily still wore, the faded jacket folded across the chair, and the same envelope of unpaid bills resting beside her mother's bed. Even after everything she had endured, she had never spoken with bitterness. She had continued working, continued caring, and continued believing that honesty would eventually matter. A physician entered briefly to explain that another treatment could move forward once the outstanding balance was resolved. Emily thanked the doctor politely, never mentioning the investigation or the missing wages. After the physician left, Linda looked at her daughter with concern. "Did your employer ever believe you?" Emily paused for a moment before answering in the calm voice Vincent had come to recognize. "Maybe not yet, but people can only decide based on what they know. If they learn the truth one day, that will be enough for me." Those simple words settled deeply within Vincent. She was offering understanding to the very people who had failed her. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet hope that fairness would eventually find its way into the world. Vincent lowered his eyes, realizing that his greatest mistake had not been trusting financial records. It had been allowing those records to replace compassion. He stepped away from the doorway before either woman noticed his presence, carrying with him a silence far heavier than when he had arrived. As he walked back through the hospital corridor, the investigation folder beneath his arm no longer felt like a collection of documents. It felt like undeniable proof that an honest woman had carried the weight of another person's deception with remarkable dignity. Before reaching the parking lot, Vincent stopped, removed his phone, and called Sarah Mitchell. His instructions were calm, but this time they carried something deeper than authority. "Gather every employee at the estate this afternoon," he said. "The truth belongs in the open, and today the person who has been treated most unfairly will finally receive the respect she should have had from the beginning." By late Friday afternoon, every employee working at the Romano estate had been asked to gather inside the grand reception hall, a room usually reserved for formal celebrations rather than unexpected meetings. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long reflections across the polished marble floor, while conversations remained quiet and uncertain. Housekeepers stood beside gardeners, maintenance workers beside office staff, all wondering why Vincent Moretti himself had called everyone together without explanation. Emily Brooks arrived a few minutes later, still wearing her simple navy housekeeping uniform after finishing her regular duties. She quietly joined the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed, unaware that the meeting had been arranged because of her. Sarah Mitchell offered her a gentle smile, but said nothing. Moments later, Vincent entered carrying a single leather folder. The room immediately fell silent. He looked slowly across the faces of the people who worked for him every day before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Several days ago, one of our employees came to my office asking for wages she had already earned. I refused her request because I believed the records placed before me." No one moved. Vincent opened the folder and continued. "I have since learned that those records did not tell the complete truth." Quiet whispers spread through the room before disappearing almost instantly. Vincent explained how the investigation had uncovered altered payroll information, falsified authorization documents, and redirected wage payments that had prevented Emily from receiving the money she had honestly earned. He did not raise his voice or accuse anyone with anger. He simply presented the verified facts one by one until there could be no doubt about what had happened. Daniel Cooper stepped forward and confirmed every detail, acknowledging that the internal review had exposed a carefully concealed manipulation within the payroll process that had escaped detection for months. Employees who had quietly assumed Emily was mistaken lowered their eyes as the truth settled over the room. Vincent then looked directly toward the back, where Emily stood in complete silence. "Emily Brooks," he said, "would you please come forward?" She hesitated for a brief moment before walking slowly through the crowd. Every step echoed softly across the marble floor. When she reached the front of the room, Vincent faced everyone once again. This woman never asked for anything she did not earn. She spoke the truth from the very beginning, and I failed to recognize it because I trusted documents more than character. The hall became so quiet that even the faint sound of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. Vincent handed the investigation folder to Sarah before turning back to Emily. "You continued doing your work with professionalism even after being treated unfairly. You continued caring for your family without speaking with bitterness. That deserves acknowledgement from every person standing here, beginning with me." Emily looked around the room and saw expressions that had changed completely from only a few days earlier. Some employees offered quiet nods of respect. Others appeared deeply embarrassed by the assumptions they had made. She did not respond with pride or resentment. She simply folded her hands together and listened. For the first time since entering the Romano organization months earlier, she no longer felt invisible. She had not won because she demanded attention. She had won because the truth had finally been allowed to stand where doubt once stood, and in that remarkable silence, dignity spoke louder than any accusation ever could. No one spoke as Vincent Moretti reached into the leather folder and removed a certified check along with a detailed accounting statement prepared that morning. He stepped toward Emily Brooks with a level of humility that many of his employees had never witnessed before. The powerful businessman who usually negotiated multi-million-dollar agreements now focused his attention on one woman whose quiet honesty had exposed a failure that numbers alone could not reveal. "Emily," he said gently, "this payment includes every dollar of unpaid wages, every employment benefit connected to those wages, and compensation for the financial hardship caused by our failure to protect what you earned. Nothing can erase what happened, but I hope this begins to make it right." He extended the documents toward her with both hands. Emily accepted the envelope carefully, looking first at the accounting statement before glancing back at Vincent. She remained silent for several seconds, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. Then she looked up and spoke with the same calm voice everyone had heard since the beginning. "Thank you for believing the truth when you found it." She paused before continuing. "But I cannot accept money that I did not earn." Several employees exchanged confused looks, assuming she intended to reject the payment completely. Emily slowly separated the documents, pointing to the detailed breakdown. "These wages belong to me because I worked for them. The employment benefits belong to me because they were promised. I will gratefully accept those. But the additional compensation was offered because you feel responsible for what happened. I appreciate the kindness, yet someone else may need that help more than I do." The room became perfectly still. Vincent looked at her with genuine surprise. Most people in her position would have accepted every dollar without hesitation. Emily instead asked only for what honesty had already earned. She continued speaking with quiet sincerity. "If you truly want something good to come from this, use those funds to make certain that no employee here ever has to wonder whether their work will be respected." Her words carried no resentment, no desire for revenge, and no attempt to embarrass anyone who had doubted her. They reflected only the values she had quietly lived every day. Vincent lowered his eyes for a brief moment, deeply moved by the generosity standing before him. When he looked back up, his voice carried both conviction and gratitude. "Then that is exactly what we will do." Turning toward the assembled employees, he announced that a new independent payroll review system would immediately be established across every company under his leadership. Every employee would receive direct access to payment records, Multiple verification procedures would be required for payroll changes, and confidential reporting channels would be available to anyone who believed something was wrong. Transparency would become a permanent part of the organization rather than an occasional review. Quiet applause slowly spread through the hall, not because of the policy itself, but because everyone understood why it now existed. Vincent returned his attention to Emily once more. You asked only for fairness when you could have demanded much more. Today you reminded all of us that integrity cannot be purchased, only practiced. Emily offered a gentle smile, carefully, placed the envelope containing her rightful wages into her work bag, and thanked him with the same quiet dignity she had carried from the very beginning, leaving everyone in the room with the unmistakable feeling that true strength often speaks in the softest voice. The days that followed quietly transformed more than payroll records or company policies. They changed the way people looked at one another inside the Romano organization. Employees who had once hurried past the housekeeping staff without a greeting now paused to offer a smile or a simple thank you. Department managers became more willing to listen before making judgments. The new payroll verification system was implemented exactly as Vincent Moretti had promised, with every employee receiving secure access to payment records and multiple layers of review designed to protect honest work. What had begun as one woman's search for the wages she had earned became the reason hundreds of families could trust the system supporting their livelihoods. Emily Brooks never asked for recognition. The following Monday, she arrived before sunrise exactly as she always had, quietly preparing the estate before anyone else began the day. She polished windows, organized fresh flowers, and carefully arranged every room with the same attention she had shown long before anyone knew her story. Nothing about her character changed after receiving justice because integrity had never depended on being appreciated. Later that morning, Vincent walked through the main hallway and noticed Emily replacing a vase of white lilies near the entrance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried none of the misunderstanding that had existed only days earlier. Vincent finally broke the silence with a gentle smile. "How is your mother?" Emily's face brightened. She received her treatment on Friday afternoon. The doctors are optimistic, and she asked me to thank everyone who helped make that possible. Vincent nodded gratefully. "I am glad to hear it." He hesitated before continuing. "You taught me something I should have learned long ago. Leadership is not only about protecting numbers. It is about protecting people." Emily looked at the fresh flowers she had just arranged before answering. Sometimes people only need someone willing to look beyond the paperwork. Those simple words remained with Vincent long after their conversation ended. Over the following months, he personally visited every department across his organization, speaking with employees whose names he had previously known only through reports and organizational charts. He listened more carefully. He asked more questions. Decisions that once relied entirely upon data now included the human stories behind every number. Sarah Mitchell often remarked that the company had become quieter in the best possible way, with respect replacing assumptions in countless ordinary moments that no official report would ever record. One afternoon, Vincent received a handwritten letter from Linda Brooks thanking him not only for correcting the payroll mistake, but for restoring her daughter's faith that honesty still mattered. He carefully placed the letter inside his desk rather than filing it away with business documents because it reminded him daily of the responsibility carried by every decision made from behind that desk. As another autumn evening settled over the Chicago skyline, Emily finished her shift and stepped outside the Romano estate. The cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves while golden sunlight reflected across the quiet streets ahead. She walked toward the city bus with the same steady pace she had always known, carrying no bitterness from the past and no expectation that life would suddenly become easy. What she carried instead was something far more valuable. She carried the quiet certainty that dignity cannot be taken from a person who refuses to surrender it, and that truth, even when delayed, still has the power to change hearts, restore justice, and remind the world that the greatest measure of wealth is not what a person owns, but how faithfully they honor the humanity of another.